Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. On today's episode, we got a lot to unpack, and you know where we're headed with this one. UFC 297 took place this past Saturday in Toronto, Canada. Yes, we're going to spend a lot of time there. Gorgeous George here on the con, and look at the distinguished panel we have for you today. SBC creator goes from MMA Junkie Radio. He's in Las Vegas. Matt Wells from the editorial team. He's in the Big D, Dallas, Texas, ready to bring. It's been a while, Matt. Great to have you back. And of course, Mike Bond. He was in the eye of that storm in Toronto, Canada. Glad to have you back as well, Mike. One of the best in the business. Cold coffee, of course, on the ones and twos. But before we get started, if you would kindly tap that like button, let's just say I wouldn't be mad at you. That'll jolt the algorithm or something like that. In the main event at UFC 297, Dricus Du Plessis defeated Sean Strickland via split decision. DDP is now the first South African to win UFC gold, and he went the whole 25 minutes against the formidable cardio machine. Social media was pretty split. MMA Decisions, shout out to those guys. They also had it pretty evenly split amongst the media that turned in scores. UFC president Dana White, he leaned towards the former champ Tarzan. Panel, though, you guys are the ones that matter. What was your reaction to the fight, including your scorecard? Mike, we're going to go to you first. You were there.
Yeah, it was obviously really close. I was cage side for it all. I did think at the end, just my general feeling, like as we wound down that fifth round, that Dricus Du Plessis had that fight, and I thought him getting 48-47 was the correct scorecards. I gave him round 2, round 3, and round 4. Some of them were close, though, man. Like, if you want to make a case for Sean Strickland 48-47, I'm not going to sit here and say it's wrong or anything like that, but the fact that Dricus won, it's not a robbery or anything like that. Like, this is a close fight. How many times do we have to say it? You know, not all close fights are robberies, things like that. So I'm fine with it. I thought it was okay the way it went, and Dricus impressed me, man. I mean, everyone has kind of said, what was he going to be able to do in a fight that looked pretty much like this? And he told me when we spoke before fight week, because he got into Toronto pretty early ahead of this one, and he said, this is going to be the fight of the night, maybe a fight of the year contender if Sean Strickland can stand in there and take it with me. And I'm not going to fold. Even if I'm tired, I'm going to keep pushing, and I will win a decision if this goes 5 rounds. And he held true to pretty much all of those words. So you got to give him a tip of the cap for that. People ridiculing him and being upset about the decision, it's not the guy's fault. He fought as hard as he could. If it went the other way, it would have been what it was. And that really falls out of their hands. It's in the judges' hands when it goes to things like that. So I thought both guys did about as much as they could do. Maybe you could say Sean Strickland didn't really push as hard as he could have in those middle rounds. And I think if you hear the corner work of Eric Nixick throughout this fight, he obviously agreed. He was unhappy with a couple of the rounds, and he told Sean that to him straight up. So I don't know, when you don't fight, you know, the perfect fight, the flawless fight like he had against Israel Adesanya, you open the door up a little bit to things like this and leaving yourself on the wrong end of a decision. It's a little more of a common thing now with Sean Strickland. His past 2 losses, Jared Cannonier, and then this one, both decisions you could make the case he should have won, but maybe he's just not doing quite enough in these fights. So that's something maybe they need to go back and consider a little more going into the next one. But all in all, I thought it was a great fight, kind of saved the night on a tough watch of a UFC 297 card. And congratulations to the new champion. I don't think you can say Dricus Du Plessis did not deserve this.
And Mike, you were there. I also want to know, man, what was it like as it was unfolding? Did it meet your expectations? I say that because in December, we had all these controversies. Then fight week, things seemed to simmer down a little bit. But hey, at the end, it did seem like a possible 2-2 fight going into round 5. What was the atmosphere like? What was the buzz like those final 5 minutes?
Yeah, it was good. I mean, I think the crowd was at that point a little tapped out just on the whole experience of the night. Like, can you guys remember a UFC pay-per-view ending later than this one? I think the main event wrapped like, you know, close to 1:30 a.m. or something like that. So it was late, and just seeing, you know, the Canadian fighters, at least the males, go 0-7. That was, we'll get into Raquel Pennington versus Mayra Bueno Silva, but like that was, you know, a bit of a slog to get through. And then you get this fight. I think it got as much of the excitement out of the fans as possible. But yeah, there was some good energy in there for sure. But yeah, I think it lived up to it. I mean, what can you ask for? It was a pretty high level fight. I know some of the striking got a little bit sloppy at times, but as for what it was, I thought it was good. You know, both guys dug deep. It was a bloody fight. Like, you can't really ask for too much more out of a championship fight besides maybe a definitive finish for one guy.
Good stuff. Shout out to the Toronto crowd. They came strong all week, man. It was a long night, though, for sure. A lot of decisions as well. Hey, turn in your score in the chat, and I'll read some off. Let's get to Matt Wells. It's been a while since we had you, Matt. I always love your takes. What'd you think, man, as you were watching the fight unfold? You know, we were all kind of looking forward to this fight quite a lot. And like I said, it was just a roller coaster of ups and downs with the whole temperature of the rivalry or not. You know, is there heat or not? But what'd you think anyway?
No, I thought the fight was fantastic as it played out. You know, you like to see guys kind of stand in the pocket and trade shots, and that's what it felt like was happening. As the fight wore on, you know, we saw Dricus implement those takedowns and try to switch things up and give Sean some different looks, and whereas Sean really didn't do that. Sean just stuck to what he did the entire fight, which was just kind of stay in that Philly shell and just kind of work his counter game, whereas Dricus was mixing things up. We saw him come out as you know, in those later rounds, kind of swinging those hooks a little bit different, giving him some different angles to work with, and we saw him start to land a little bit more, whereas Sean was just firing that jab right down the middle, and it works. You know, he offered a few kicks here and there, but, you know, Sean is just, I think he needs to, you know, mix up his game a little bit more, because guys can kind of figure out his style. But that's not to say it's not effective, because his shell is pretty damn infuriating. If you're an opponent of his trying to land on him, he's good defensively in rolling with those shots and getting just out of way to where you can't really land on him as cleanly as you would like. But Dricus did fairly well adjusting as the fight went on and found some openings, found homes for some bigger punches. But it's not to say, man, it was a very close fight. It was very entertaining. It was probably one of the more entertaining middleweight title fights in recent memory. If you go back and look at it, you know, a lot of people were hating on a lot of Izzy's title defenses. Some of that's fair criticism, but this was a pretty damn good fight. And you know, whether the crowd was into it or not, you know, if they were fatigued, I don't think that really plays too much into what actually, you know, played out inside the cage. It was a fun fight to watch. As far as the results, I mean, you can't really argue either way too much. It was just that close. I'm not a fan of you have to take it from the champion mentality, because you literally scored the fight round by round, and right, however the scorecards come out, that's how it comes out. So I'm not mad at the result either way. Watching it, I believe I tweeted out, you know, it was tied going into the final round. And it was just a coin flip sort of thing for me, man. And I was honestly like, as Bruce Buffer was reading the result, I had no clue which way it was going to go. Wasn't going to be mad either way. It was just one of those fights, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. So you were like Jared Valal in the Sean Woodson fight. He didn't know which way it was going to go either. He raised the wrong hand, but that's a whole other topic. Matt, let me ask you something, man. It just occurred to me, and I don't know why. It should be obvious. You think Sean almost got caught up in, hey, that guy's face is pretty damaged. Maybe I am winning this fight. Maybe I'm not doing as bad as I think I'm doing, or as it appears Coach Eric Nixick thinks I'm doing.
Dominic Cruz was caught up in that part.
Exactly. That's a Dominic Cruz scoring system right there. You know, who's got the bigger cuts, you win the fight automatically. You know, after Dricus got that punch and sliced open that cut kind of on the top of Strickland's head, I was like, oh, it's a TKO. It's over. Dricus won right there. So,
all right. Goes, man. I know we did the watch along, but a lot of people want to hear your takes here that may not have tuned in. What were your thoughts as it was unfolding?
You know, I was a little confused because we were promised high level, high strategy, high game plan. And in the end, just kind of squeak by and get a win. But enough about the 49ers. This main event, look, it was a little bit of a roller coaster for me, all right? Because after that fight in the crowd, I felt like I was going to watch kind of like a Rock'em Sock'em Robots, right? Maybe some guys were going to deviate from their game plans. It's very personal. Then you see them, they shake hands, and you kind of come down, which is okay because you want intensity. You don't want somebody to get hurt. You want them to make it to the fight. When the fight took place, it was a lot different than what I expected, but I enjoyed it. I thought there were a lot of tactics. I thought on Dricus' side, he did make the adjustments, and I felt like that was what won him the fight. As Matt mentioned, Eric Nixick was shouting out the instructions. It just wasn't really clicking for Sean. He wasn't really taking him in. And I ended up scoring it 3-2. I gave the middle rounds to DDP. On night of, I actually gave it to Sean Strickland. I went back, I watched it yesterday, put some headphones on, didn't listen to any commentary, nothing. And I did feel like DDP edged him out. Like Matt said, that defense is just, it's so remarkable. You guys don't understand, like in boxing, it works because the gloves are so big, right? And you're only getting hands thrown at you. In MMA, to be able to pull off that type of defense is phenomenal for Sean Strickland. The only problem was more his offense, right? I think over and over, it was just kind of like the same combo. And I think DDP over time just figured it out, understood it. And then he mixed in the takedowns, right? And I think when you blend that all together, that's, I think, what got him the win. Sean Strickland's got to go back. He's got to make some adjustments. But I don't know. I thought overall it was a pretty damn good fight.
Your scores are very similar to two of the judges' goes. Derek Cleary and Eric Colon had Strickland winning 1-5, which I'm not sure if this is something you told me pre-show or you said it right now. 1-5, and then 2, 3, and 4 went to Du Plessis. Sal D'Amato had Strickland winning 1, 3, and 5, and Du Plessis 2 and 4. I thought Nix had commented to me, or his maybe publicly, his personal feeling was 1, 2, and 4 for Strickland. The media scores were about a 2-1 in favor of Du Plessis over Strickland, but there was sufficient Strickland enough to, I think, back up what we saw was basically a split decision. Look, man, I thought it was a great fight, but Mike, what I was telling Goes on MMA Junkie Radio yesterday on the podcast was, I think the difference may have been DDP from the moment he landed and he spoke to you like a week out. He just seemed laser focused to the task up until fight day. And then during fight day, for those 25 minutes, he was not going to be deterred. Whereas I think Sean Strickland, those distractions, and then on fight night, he just has this look, like this glazed look, Eric's talking to him, but is he even taking it in, man? Like I say, DDP, did you see it as well? He just really showed up to be a world champion that night. You're muted, Mike.
Apologies. He did everything the right way. I thought coming in, like you said, got in here early, was acclimated, was embracing the freezing cold of Toronto, saying it's a refreshing change of climate from South Africa and all that stuff. Yeah, it was all handled like very professionally from him. You saw him at the media days, the press conference. He did everything right, was obviously in incredible shape at weigh-ins too. So yeah, he said, I'm here to handle myself professionally and, be a champion and stuff. And it is a little bit of a change of pace, right? From, of course, Sean Strickland and then, Israel Adesanya before him, who had, his moments of maybe immaturity, if you would want to call it that, for lack of a better word. Like he's up there, he's wearing the suit at the press conference, all that stuff. We haven't really seen a middleweight champion like this in a minute. Alex Pereira's reign was brief. He's obviously a classy guy for the most part as well too. But yeah, I think Dricus is a guy who takes this whole thing very seriously, and he knew this was his opportunity, his moment, and one that a lot of people thought maybe wouldn't come his way, right? Like he made the decision to pass up that title fight in Australia when he wasn't completely healthy, and he got all sorts of backlash for that, saying you're never going to get the opportunity again, this, that, and the other thing. We've seen this happen multiple times before where people have passed up that chance. It's never come back around to them. He waited. He was confident. He said all the right things. If I didn't get the shot now, I would have fought someone else, beat them, and got my shot anyways. So you got to respect the approach from him at minimum. And then in the fight, like I said, he did the best he could. And it's not his fault if you think he lost and was awarded the win. Like, that's out of his hands. That's the judge's decision. He came in and I think handled himself quite properly throughout this whole fight week process. So again, credit to him.
For sure. And you're right. What was the body of water that he went in, and how cold was that, by the way?
Lake Ontario. Yeah, pretty damn cold. I couldn't tell you the exact temperature because I would not go in there myself this time of year.
That is crazy. It was nice, though, that his girlfriend had an extra bottom for him. All right. Some of the scores here that I see. Joseph Boza, he says 3-2 DDP. Josh Wallace says Strickland 1-5 DDP 2, 3, and 4. Don Piccolo says I gave it to Strickland 3-2. Jills A says I actually had DDP winning 49-46. Wow, I don't think I've seen that score. I've seen either side 48-47, but I don't think I had seen that one. He says I only thought Sean won round 1. All right, if I can get to some other scores, I will. But great fight for both guys. Do you want to see a DDP versus Izzy fight now, or part 2? And yes, we're well aware that already the UFC president is kind of pouring water over an immediate rematch. But I'll go back to Mike. What are your thoughts here, Mike? You want to which direction you should go? Do you think the promotion should go? I only feel like this is a valid question because Strickland was beloved by that crowd, and the UFC seems to pay attention to things like that. They're in the business of selling tickets.
But it's also Israel Adesanya, right? Like he's got his own degree of star power. Don't forget,
True.
Khamzat Chimaev, who I do think, if you're to make like an argument or like a power rankings of who's the most deserving, he would probably be at the bottom considering his lack of a body of work at middleweight. But you can't forget, he was promised the title shot for a win over Kamaru Usman and taking that fight on short notice in Abu Dhabi and whatnot. So I don't know if they're going to stick true to their guns. His health situation seems to be a little bit fuzzy and all that. So I put Khamzat like number 3. Number 2, I guess I would put Sean Strickland, just because, you could make an argument he didn't deserve the title shot against Israel and he was just a product of circumstance, and then he didn't defend the belt at all. So even if you think he won this fight, it wasn't just quite enough for me to say, let's run that back right away, especially when you have what would be number 1 on my list, the Israel Adesanya fight, just sitting there waiting. I know there's issues with that as well. People will say he got the immediate rematch against Pereira when he lost, which was more than warranted, in my opinion. A bit of a debatable stoppage when he lost to him in New York, and he had defended his title 5 times before that. So I can't really see the argument about giving him the rematch in that one. But his second title reign, he didn't defend the belt and lost it to Sean Strickland. But I think just given what he's done overall in his career, the fact that he's admitted he could be kind of on the back end here. We don't know how many fights he has left. There just could not be many more opportunities to do this. Like, look at this face-off. We all remember this. This was such a hot fight when this all went down. You could make, the case that it was for some of the wrong reasons, given like the undertones of the storyline, but it was a promotable fight, and I think it still very much is. So to me, that's the one you got to do, just because we've seen so many times the UFC maybe step aside and wait a little too long for a certain fight, then it passes them by. This is one I think you can't leave on the back burner. If Israel Adesanya is ready and wants to fight, I think you give him first dibs, and if he's not prepared for it or isn't ready on the timeline, then you move on, maybe talk to Sean Strickland, talk to Khamzat. Jared Cannonier is a name that's being thrown out there. Of course, he has the win over Strickland, but must be reminded he just pulled out of a fight in December with Roman Dolidze due to a torn MCL. Turns 40 in a few weeks. We don't know what his timeline is for fighting and all that stuff. So I think he's a name you have to consider too, but not quite in the running. So to me, choice number 1, Israel Adesanya. If he's not ready, there's plenty of other options you can move on to.
Matt, you seem to be nodding your head in approval. Is that the direction you would go in as well?
Absolutely. That's the choice for me, man. If Izzy is ready and if Izzy is motivated, I could see Izzy coming into this matchup and creating a highlight, because Dricus' style for Izzy, I think, is perfect for the way that Izzy fights. I mean, Izzy's counter game is sharp, and it's on point. When he's on point and he's like really out there to try to make something happen, I think Izzy could create a highlight off of Dricus. Just because Dricus, he still has a lot of, like, just watching that fight with Sean, like, there's a lot of moments where it's like, that was pretty sloppy. And Izzy can really take advantage of some of those moments. Again, as long as he's motivated and is really hungry to go out there and start another title reign. So that's the fight for me. I'm not interested in a Strickland rematch. I don't think that, that should be the direction the UFC goes. And Dana, like was already mentioned, Dana doesn't seem interested as well. So let's see what happens. I guess Sean goes back to highlighting or, headlining, what was it, 3 or 4 Apex events in a row again, or something like that. I think, how many fights did he have since COVID in the Apex? Wasn't it like 6 or 7, something like that?
A lot.
I'll go back and look. It was a lot. Yeah, it was at least 7, I think. But yeah, go with Izzy and Dricus, like always, like that was already mentioned. The bad blood there, the highlights, the trash talk, the fight has already built itself. You just got to book it, put it on paper, and make it happen.
All right, goes. Is it unanimous? And let me just stop for the slightest pushback here. That would be Izzy's second time getting an immediate rematch. Respect. He did defend 5 times. He can sell, but not too many athletes get, afforded that opportunity. And part 2 is the UFC wants to make a huge splash in the continent of Africa. They want to build a UFC PI as well. South Africa has hosted a World Cup. They now have a champion there. This almost seems like a perfect fight to go to there. I haven't heard of any plans that in the first half of the year that kind of lay that out. So does this fight, if you say Izzy, does it happen in Vegas, or do they wait and make that splash in the continent of Africa?
Well, look, if you did it, I mean, it'd be huge no matter where you take this fight, right? But if you did it in South Africa, that's next level. That would be pretty amazing. To your point about Israel Adesanya, I understand you, George. I think you make sense. But, on this show, I think we're always talking about, look, we need to do what's right. When there's somebody on a streak, they deserve to be next. But if you look below Israel Adesanya, there really just isn't much there. Like Mike pointed out, Khamzat Chimaev, it's not like we're really hurting him, right? When his resume in that division, it's just one of those situations where sometimes you can think outside the lines, especially if you're thinking UFC 300, right? That's where kind of the rules get blurred a little bit. However, looking at Dricus walking out of the cage that night and later on that night, he doesn't look like a guy that would be ready for 300. So maybe you do shoot for that goal of doing something in South Africa. I think it would be tremendous. You would get a 100% Israel Adesanya, a 100% Dricus Du Plessis, and I think that's what we want. There's still a little beef that needs to be settled, and I think that would be a fun route to go.
Very well. Well put, gentlemen. All right, Chris Wild, a few more scores that trickled in. He had rounds 1, 2, and 5 for Strickland. And another one that I just saw was my Thai Pa Milkman says 1, 2, 5 Strickland, 3 and 4 were clear. Dricus. Sean Kissy on Facebook says Sean won. He didn't give me the rounds. I don't read minds, Sean. A little bit more info would be great. But he said Sean won. That could be 50-45. It could be 48-47. Contribute, pal. All right. Yeah, and YouTube, Facebook, you both can participate in the chat. So keep bringing it. Hit that like button if you wouldn't mind. We would greatly appreciate it. We're going to move on to the next topic. We might have gone a little long here. Raquel Pennington defeated Mayra Bueno Silva to become the new UFC bantamweight champion. The ladies also went the distance. However, this fight was heavily in favor of Pennington, who won 4 rounds to 1 on all the judges' scorecards, and this includes a 10-8 score for one judge. This fight definitely wasn't praised as the main event. The action, it stalled at times, and MBS fatigued quite a bit. What are your expectations for Pennington as champ? Can she stay on top for a bit, or will this be a short reign for Rocky? Matt, you're up.
I think her title reign could be a little rocky, just depending on who her first challenger is. And if you guys stuck around for the post show, you kind of saw Amanda Nunes do an interview there with Megan O'Leary, and she kind of hinted that, hey, maybe I might come back. Maybe. She didn't exactly say that her career was completely finalized. Yes, she's retired right now, but she did kind of leave that door open for a return. And we all remember what happened the first time Amanda fought Raquel Pennington. She had Raquel turning her to her coach saying, I want to be done, please. I'm done. So if you run that back, I think Amanda's going to take that belt back. But, it's all about if Amanda decides to come back. If they don't do that and Raquel fights Juliana Pena, I think that'd be a fun fight to watch. That would be a nice little scrap, I think. Who wins that? It all depends on, is Juliana fully healthy? Is she going to, keep up with the aggression? I don't know. That would be a tough one to pick for me. I think that would be one where I'd have to really think and sit and analyze, which pick I would go with. But I wouldn't be surprised if Raquel did pick up a defense off of that. It's a fight that she's wanted for a very long time, as she mentioned in her post-fight interview and in the back during the post-fight press conference. That's a fight she's been wanting her entire career. So she would really get up for that fight in the training room, really come in really motivated to get a win over Juliana. And of course, on the flip side, Juliana would be really motivated to get that title back. So I think that would be a fun fight. But again, it all comes down to which fight gets booked first for Raquel. And then we can really talk about, what her title reign would look like after that.
Yeah. And Juliana can definitely run the smack. So I think people would get a lot more interested than they were in this fight. Goes, how about you, man? Can Rocky get a couple title defenses? She's 35 years old. She's been in the game for a long time. What are your thoughts?
I think that's going to be pretty tough. Look, if we just look at the landscape of all the divisions in the UFC, there are only a handful where you just feel like there's somebody that's going to hold on to the title for a long time, right? For the most part, these titles get passed around. But here, Raquel Pennington, look, I thought she had a good performance. But I think a lot of it also had to do with the fact that Myra just didn't show up, right? It wasn't high quality MMA on her behalf. You look at somebody like Juliana Pena, and yes, she has losses on her record, but she shows up to fights, and that's a tough fight there. Then you bring in what Matt was talking about, right? With Amanda Nunes. Amanda Nunes, I think it was last week or the week before, we were talking about people we felt like were going to come back. Well, that was a name, right? And if you hear her speak, it does sound like she would come back. And if she does that, well, then it's kind of game over. This division, it's really tough because I kind of put it up against the men's light heavyweight division in the sense that no matter what they do, you kind of have the ghost of John Jones, and you always kind of look at it like that. And I think that's the same thing with Amanda Nunes. No matter what these girls do in this division, you just always feel like they're never going to live up to that. So you have to do something phenomenal in a fight. And Raquel Pennington did a good job. She did her job, but it wasn't anything phenomenal, right? So I think she could give Juliana Pena a good fight, but I think Juliana Pena would probably take that title right now. And not to completely just go in on Pennington, I don't even know that Juliana Pena would hold on to the belt for that long. I mean, things just aren't that high right now in that division. But if Amanda Nunes comes back, boy, that'll really spice things up. And I think that belt goes right back on her waist.
All right, Mike, how about you, man? What are your thoughts? And, before you comment, I just want to say, I'm looking at Pennington's record. She really does have some decent wins. I almost feel like I'm being too harsh with the question. Can she last through 2024? She's beaten Bueno Silva, right? Caitlin Vera, Aspen Ladd. Now, a lot of these decisions, Macy Chasson, Marion Renault, Irene Aldana, Misha Tate back in the day, Jessica Andrade. Holy cow. Are we discounting the champ a little too much?
Maybe a little bit, yeah. But you got to look at some of the losses too, right? Like you see her 2 defeats to Holly Holm, which were pretty tough fights to watch, and some of the other key ones on her record. Raquel Pennington is, for this division, one of the longest tenured fighters. She deserved this opportunity. It's nice to see her kind of get that gratification of the long road, right? Like her 18th UFC fight, wins that title. That's the most fights of any female champion before getting a belt. So she put in the work. You can't discount it there. Not really her fault that Myra Bueno Silva didn't have the endurance to go 5 rounds, and she had the fight essentially in the bag and just kind of rode it out. So much to gain and so much to lose in this scenario right there. So I can't critique her too much for the fight itself, even though it was, a tough watch there. I've used that quote a few times on this episode already in regards to this card. But for her, as far as like what's next, it's got to be Juliana Pena for sure. If Nunes comes back, yeah, you give her that opportunity right away. But I think that's one of the things where the UFC would probably want to have a conversation about Amanda Nunes's intentions, right? I don't think they want to have to go through this process again, right? Of her winning the belt, saying she's done, leaving the division high and dry, and then having to scrape the pieces back together and put together fights of people that Amanda Nunes has already shown she's levels above. So I think it's going to be a bit of an interesting year or so coming up for this division, just to see how it evolves, if any new players can emerge. Otherwise, I think you're going to see a lot of positions like this where it's a co-main event of a bigger title fight and doesn't really get all the spotlight there. It's just kind of a second title fight addition here. But what can Pennington do? I think she can beat Juliana Pena. I mean, Juliana is obviously shown with her win against Amanda Nunes what she's capable of, but I still need to see a little bit more of that. By the time she fights, it'll probably be like 18 months off, maybe more. So I don't know. I wouldn't say she's like a huge favorite or a lock to beat Raquel Pennington. I think Pennington can beat any of these fighters out there right now in the division, sans Amanda Nunes. But yeah, I mean, I don't really know what to make of this whole thing. It just feels very kind of dull and not extremely interesting. But I guess the one compelling thing Pennington did say is, I want to defend this belt a couple times, and then I'm probably out of here. So I don't really know. We could have a second champion retiring with that belt within the next year or so if she can hang on to it. So I don't know. This division's a mess, and I think the matchmakers and the UFC brass have some work to do to regain a bit of interest, because this was not a great way to kick off the post Amanda Nunes era.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we'll end with just giving Rocky her praise, man. She's now won 6 in a row since that first title loss. Let me see here. Since the Holly Holm fight, she won 5 in a row to put herself in the position for a second shot at the title, I guess is what I was trying to say. She's got some really nice wins. So it's already been a pretty fine career. And this is really fun to see a fighter kind of work towards the second or their second chance and get the title. So we'll just leave it at that. Congrats to Raquel Pennington. Let's move on here. So look, at the end of the night, there seemed to be this collective relief, right? That the fight was over, or fight week was over, I should say. We had some outstanding performances, some KOs, some submissions, some snoozers, etc. But as you all know, fight week also had controversy. Sean Strickland's rant towards a media member and the LGBTQ community was talked about on every level of media, not just MMA. ESPN, the UFC's broadcast partner, was asked to comment, but they deferred to UFC PR. The UFC, as we know, allows their fighters to speak freely and with zero repercussions. I must note, although there are many that are outraged at Strickland and the UFC, Strickland was obviously well received by MMA fans in Toronto and also had tremendous support online for his honesty. Can the UFC continue conducting business the way it has in terms of straying away from the code of conduct that they created over 10 years ago? Goes, you get the first take.
Look, I think it all starts at the top, right? Dana White's the guy in charge. He's not your typical guy in charge. And some people will say that's part of his allure, right? He's had his controversies in the past as well. But if you don't expect him to kind of follow any of these rules, then you can't really expect the employees to do that, right? You would think sponsorship wise, partner wise, eventually the luck would run out. But I just feel like, especially in this country, man, money, as long as money keeps coming in, I think people just kind of overlook certain things. And I know a lot of people will point to our sport and say, well, look, it's an edgy sport. Well, there's a lot of edgy sports, man. Boxing, even if you look at WWE, for as crazy as that can get, sometimes they don't reach some of the things that we hear coming out of fighters' mouths here. I guess what scares me is just that line, the line keeps getting pushed. And some people know how to manage that line, but other people, you would be shocked how far their line could go. So if you're not going to have order up at the top, you can't expect the employees to fall in line with that. And I think it'll just probably continue this way as long as they're still making a lot of money. You would imagine eventually that luck will run out. But look, it's been a while, and this has just been kind of the way they've been doing things.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mike, you were there, so you had a good beat on what the vibe was maybe surrounding all this. Maybe there's stuff we don't know, but one thing that got brought up was they're going to renegotiate with ESPN or, maybe a new broadcast deal. Obviously, others might come into play as well, but ESPN, owned by Disney, we know that they've had a certain stance when it comes to these types of comments, man. What do you get from all this, being that you had a front row seat all week?
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously the code of conduct isn't something that is adhered to, and it's been like that for a long time. So referencing at this point is almost a lost cause or pointless because they've just moved beyond this. I mean, there's countless examples of maybe early on where they did implement some punishments and things like that. Nate Diaz getting fined for, tweeting out some stuff and other examples, but these are all so long ago. These are pre-sale instances. And I think in recent years, we've seen the UFC become a different company. And that's, under Dana White's leadership, what his perspectives are on the world and just how the behavior of the athletes. He's allowed people to, I know it's not called, took issue with John Pollock at the post-fight press conference, using the word a leash. John tweeted out a better word maybe to use in that moment would have been like giving fighters more latitude to say certain things. And that's probably the more appropriate way to kind of frame this. The UFC gives them a lot of latitude to be themselves, say what they want. And the instance of Sean Strickland is interesting, right? I think the UFC probably knew that Sean Strickland wouldn't have a very long title reign if he won this one. They were probably confident he would maybe lose the next one or the next one after that. And they're like, hey, we just got to kind of ride this wave. If he'd said something maybe so beyond the scope, I don't really know exactly what that would be, given all the things he's already said. Maybe they would take some action, but they seem to relatively be okay or didn't condemn some of his nastier comments or interpretations of things. And, that it kind of just is what it is. This is what the UFC is at this point. On my side of it, like, I do understand where they're coming from. They want to have this area where these fighters can be themselves and not really punish them. There's obviously lots of instances where you feel like it goes too far, but they've made their stance pretty clear, and I don't think they're changing it. So you kind of just got to accept it for what it is. You would like some accountability on some degree, but I think we see how they operate at this point. So expecting things to change or them to suddenly start laying down the law, I just don't really think it's going to happen right now. So there is some respect in that. They want to be the sport. This is how they choose to run their business. And I have a bit of a thicker skin when it comes to this kind of stuff. I've been covering the sport for a long time, so I feel like I've almost seen it all at this point. So it doesn't really bother me as much. But yeah, some of the stuff that is not really borderline, like there's a difference, I think, that people are mixing up a little bit between free speech and hate speech, right? Like you can have everyone is entitled to their free speech, but when you're starting to get like hateful towards certain groups or whatever it may be, that's where I think it starts crossing the line a little bit, and where you would like to see people just have some common decency and like respect for each other. That's something that I think would just help the sport as a whole, but some people aren't going to operate that way, and the UFC wants to give them the latitude to do that. So I don't really know what to say too much about it that hasn't been said. There was some dark moments there, some cringeworthy moments, but they're not bothered by it. So I don't really know like if I'm that bothered by it either, just knowing how they operate from the UFC side.
I hear what you're saying, man. I guess I'm just confused because they created this code of conduct and they seemed serious at that press conference or when they did this, and they would explain their stance. So I take them at that, someone that's covered the sport for a long time. I remember Brock Lesnar having to come in after saying he's going to hump his wife and drink a Coors Light. Oh, taking that one back, Bud Light. Yeah, I love you guys. And so it hasn't always been free speech. Dana kind of comes off like, don't you know, this is the UFC. This is always, no, it hasn't been that way. Big Ol' Torres, I believe, got cut for a comment he made as well.
But these are such old references, right? Like when was the last time they actually said something like this? And it's clear that's how they want to be. So yeah, it almost just feels like a pointless discussion at this point, thinking that the UFC is going to actually take action. I mean, that's like the crux of it, right? Like we can break down what Sean Strickland said, if it was horrible, if it was wrong, all that stuff. At the end of the day, he is going to be who he is, and we know who he is at this point. So I think ire you want to direct towards the UFC. I mean, we see what they want to do with this stuff at this point. So I don't know why we're shocked.
Mm-hmm. Matt, how about your thoughts, man? What did you think of everything you saw on Fight Week?
I have so many thoughts. First, I would like to just say, like Mike said, common decency would be nice to see, right? At the highest level of a sport, in any sport, regardless whether it's football, basketball, baseball, fighting, you just want to see common decency and respect for others on display. I mean, yeah, you can go out there, trash talk your opponents. That's all cool. Call them every name under the sun, whatever you want to do. But when you start getting in direct attacks, against groups of people, large groups of people that are potential fans and people that will potentially spend money to help your organization grow, kind of might want to check some of that stuff. I don't know if you guys heard this, but I do want to read a pretty scathing review of Sean Strickland's words. I'll read it for you guys. I don't know if you saw this. Here's the quote. It says, "Work at any company, anywhere in America, go out and say ignorant, stupid stuff publicly. Even on top of that, say it publicly in a big place where you can go read it and hear it publicly and see what happens to you. There's a way to voice your opinion without sounding like a bigot." You know what I mean? And he came off sounding like a complete jackass and a bigot. Did you guys hear that quote?
When was that from, though?
That was actually from Dana White in 2013 when Matt Mitrione went in on Fallon Fox.
Wow.
Yeah. 2013, right? Like he's clearly changed his opinion.
So here's my larger point. My larger point is that 10 years ago, Dana White was in line with what we were saying. And over time, something flipped, right? I've never seen a culture shift like this from any company, in any realm of business, have a complete flip on a stance like this. A company culture flip so hard. I've never seen this in any walk of life. Mm-hmm. It's kind of crazy to see. And to your point, that Mike was saying, yeah, it's fighting at the end of the day. You want to let these guys say what they want to say, but at the end of the day, it's like, okay, you have people within your own organization that are part of these groups that this person is speaking to. You don't want to say like, okay, so if Dana's saying now he doesn't want to actually go out there and muzzle these people, that's fine. You don't want to, he didn't like the leash word, so to speak, right? That's fine as well. But at the end of the day, realize you have people within your organization that are LGBTQ in that community, right? The co-main event, both fighters in that community. And then for Dana to go out there and speak on their behalf after the fact in the post-fight press conference was also a little distasteful, because I don't believe they said that themselves directly, right? That they were okay with those comments. Yeah, they may have brushed it off, but did you really sit down and ask them, like, how does this make you feel about, things like that? It's frustrating at times. It's frustrating. And if you go back, I know a lot of people as well, really went at Alexander Lee from MMA Fighting about asking that question that really set Sean off the deep end there. But go back and really look at the interaction, right? Before Alex could even get to his question, before he could even ask him about the tweet about, having the gay son and feeling like he failed as a man, Sean was already attacking Alex. Go back and look at it. I mean, before he could even get the question out, he's already going down the political road. Are you Canadian? Are you part of the opposition? And Alex is like, I don't know what that means. He was like, did you vote for Trudeau? And Alex is still trying to get the question out, and he's like, oh, you're not going to answer. Oh, you're the enemy of Canada. Then he finally actually gets to the question, like when Sean calms down, right? And then that's when he just goes off the complete deep end, calling him an infection, the definition of weakness, everything that's wrong because this world is because of you. All because he asked him about words that he himself said. That's not baiting. That's asking, like Dana said, he baited him with that question. How is that bait if I'm asking you about words that you uttered or a statement that you on your own behalf released? How is that baiting someone? I don't agree with that statement whatsoever. So it's all ridiculous. It all doesn't make sense to me, especially if you're a publicly, you're a company out there in the public eye. You want to attract people. I'm sure we're about to talk about this in a different angle as well here in a minute. This kind of stuff turns people away. Whether it resonates with a certain sect of your fan base or not, you got to think about the bigger picture here. Like, what would be so hard to put out a press release saying we don't align ourselves with these statements from so-and-so? What would be so bad about that? Whether that came from the UFC or ESPN, as we learned that ESPN had nothing to say and they deferred to UFC PR. You know what I'm saying?
I guess the argument or the question to that would be like, what, the UFC has clearly already taken this line, we're not muzzling our fighters. This isn't the stance. They put out that press release, and then are they having to do this every single week, every single month when someone says something? They've clearly gone on this side of it, not saying it's, right by any stretch of the imagination, but their thinking is probably like, well, we've already kind of locked ourselves into this position. If we start going down this road, maybe they feel like, they're going back on their own stance, which again is very questionable, and you can poke a lot of holes in that. But that would be, I guess, my view on like why they're probably doing this. They're like, hey, well, we've already committed to this, and hopefully now Sean Strickland isn't the champion and isn't representing our company and going there. And the whole thing, was complicated at media day. It was obviously very awkward being in that room and seeing that whole thing go down. And I agree that there is value in holding people accountable to their comments. But we know what Sean Strickland is at this point. I don't know what Alexander Lee was hoping would come out of that. It's not like Sean's going to be like, you know what, like, I've changed my opinion. I don't think this is the case anymore. You guys are right. I apologize for having that before. Like, we knew that was never going to go down that road. It was just going to be him doubling down on it or trying to move on or whatever he wanted to do. But there's no way you were going to get like an apology or something out of him. That doesn't mean you shouldn't ask questions or try to hold people accountable for their words. But when you're dealing with a character like Sean Strickland, I'm just not really sure like what we were expecting to come out of this, that was going to be like a complete change of the narrative when it came with Sean Strickland. We know what this guy is.
Mhm.
Yeah, but here's my point my rebuttal to that is that Sean is very aware of who he is because he says it all the time. He's like, I came from a broken home, I was abused, whatever. I was kicked out of school for hate crimes, whatever. So you're aware of, your past actions were not, in line with what, society deems acceptable, right? So when you're crossing the line, but yet you choose to go out there and get on the mic time after time and do it. And yes, that may kind of be his brand now, right? Just even with the shirt he was wearing at Media Day, a woman in every kitchen or whatever it was, whatever.
Gun in every hand or something.
Yeah, whatever the shirt said. It's still like, yeah, he's making that part of his brand, which is fine. Like, if that's what you want to do, sure. But at the end of the day, like, you are aware that this isn't the popular, so to speak, narrative that you're going out there with. Sure, there are people that agree with you. Obviously, we got, we heard his cheers when he walked out. We saw all the messages on social media. We see the messages here in this chat room right now. Some people that agree with, the statements that Sean says. So it's one of those things where you can't constantly lean on your past trauma when you're also aware of what you're saying and you're aware that it's not necessarily kosher to keep saying it. So
Yeah.
it's all a little bit hypocritical for me. At the end of the day, you want to just say, hey, like, you don't necessarily need this to sell fights, right? Because we've gotten through 30 years of it without actually having to need it until recently.
And I think that's an important point too. And goes just last thing, and then you can weigh in because I know you haven't really yet. But the Sean Stricklands and the Colby Covingtons, we must note, are the minority and the extreme minority, right? Like you just said, we've had 30 years. Like most of the fighters and most of the people aren't behaving like this in the sport. It's just we have kind of these two characters that are at the forefront of their divisions in recent years. In one case, in Sean Strickland, he became a champion. So his microphone and his viewpoint on all this gets blasted onto an even bigger radius. But for the most part, for most of our champions, for most of our fighters, they're at least semi-respectable human beings and behave in the way that we talked about earlier in this segment, should be the way you operate. So maybe, again, that's, as I said, the UFC's perspective. They're like, do we want to put so much weight on what these particular characters are saying and then have to apply that standard across all instances, across every comment from here until X time in the future? Or should we just tolerate the Sean Strickland and the Colby Covington stuff? Maybe deep down in the UFC offices on this Monday, I'm sure a lot of people are happy that Sean Strickland no longer represents the company as a champion and that they can, tuck him away at the apex and whatever, and he'll fight a couple more years and then probably move on. And, hopefully most of their people don't operate in this fashion. So I think that's maybe some of their thinking as well. But yeah, like it must be noted that as much as we talk about this stuff, as important as it is to address, Sean Strickland doesn't represent the majority of MMA, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'll just add to this, guys, like for the fighters, you have to remember that right now you have the benefit of the UFC that tolerates this type of behavior. You are making them money. Some of the names that we're throwing out there are main eventers: Colby Covington, Sean Strickland. But there's going to come a time where you're not a main eventer. There's going to be a time where the UFC has kind of just shown that when you are not making them money, they cast you off to the side and they move on to the next guy. And you're going to have to integrate into the real world. And in the real world, as Matt said, these things just don't really fly all too much, right? There are the exceptions, of course. But for the most part, they're going to have your back right now because you're making them money. But the second you stop doing that, life's going to be different.
100%.
I'll just add this. Like I say, the UFC wants to possibly renegotiate their broadcast deal with ESPN or whatever. And so when the media offers the president a chance to clarify or, not condone, I guess, what was said, really he should look at it more as an opportunity because he's a businessman. And yeah, they fight under his umbrella, right? But though he might say, I'm not going to muzzle my fighters, I'm not in agreement with what they're saying. This could cost them on the business side of things. There could be other potential sponsors that want to be a part of the UFC and the events that they throw, but they they feel a different way, you know. So this could be
they care though, right? You heard Dana White when they went back to Bud Light, he said, I'm not going to do business with people that don't align with my thing.
But see, that's the thing, Mike. Dana's word doesn't mean as much as it used to, because he always changes. You can't put your hands on a woman. He did. He's still there. Okay. And I get it. He's the president. He's part owner. He still has a percentage. But all the things that he said, the reasons why he's parted ways with fighters, it keeps changing. So give us an official stance. Don't just kind of try and discredit the past by saying, well, we just don't do that here at the UFC. Oh, at one time we may have, because there are a lot of people like yourself and myself and Goes and Matt, you know, we've all either covered it or been fans of the sport for a long time. And there's a large percentage of fans that believe in the sport and have helped the sport grow. And at the same time, you're also hurting the younger fighters, because let's just say there's Apple or Google or someone wants to throw a lot of money at the UFC, which would benefit ultimately the fighters, right? They may not want to align themselves with the UFC because of something like this. So like I said, I think Dana should view it as an opportunity. And again, he's given us the inkling or the idea that he's not on board. Like Matt Wells pointed out, Quay Stefan in the chat gave Matt a lot of props for that well-researched comment. You know, so to just change, that is quite a culture shift that you don't see in this world. So, and if anything, he might be costing other fighters and his business, which is also his employees, opportunities and fans for the sport to continue to grow. I think that's not really that hard for me to see, and I'm probably the biggest buffoon in MMA media. You know, I don't understand why Dana, it doesn't click with him.
And I'll just say this one last thing, right? Take Sean's comments, place him in a MLB press conference, place him in an NBA press conference, place him in an NFL press conference. If he says those exact same words, what happens to him? Everybody knows the answer to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. But I've said this before too.
We have to step away from like this bubble like of MMA, right? Look at the larger worldview when it comes to these sort of things and how things are handled in different workplaces, right? A lot of people in this chat, I mean, not necessarily just in this chat, but commenters as well that agree with what Sean was saying. It screams to me that some of these people, not all of you, but it screams that some people don't have real life experience in diverse workplaces, working with people from different walks of life that have to, you know, be accepting of how people live their lives.
Yep. No, I agree. I think, and I've said this before, and just last point, you know, the UFC has crafted a place for itself in, you know, the sports world and all that stuff, where they've allowed themselves in many ways to be treated the same as all these other big name sports, the ones you just listed off. But when it comes to certain instances, they're like Teflon and they do operate in this bubble. And that's what they love, right? Like Dana White wants to go out there and he wants to be treated like by an ESPN television partner, like an MLB, like an NBA. But then on the other side of it, when it's convenient, they're able to be this niche sport that no one really cares about outside the bubble. So again, not defending any of this stuff, things like that. There's, I think, objectively speaking, a lot of the things are very bad. And like you said, in most other places, but we need to understand the world that we live in and what the UFC has entrenched itself as, and, you know, look at it from that reality, because as much as we want to sit here and talk about it, they kind of hold the power in punishing people and all that kind of stuff, and they're not willing to do it. So it just kind of is what it is at this point, even though there's a lot of negative sides to it.
100%.
Guys, let's move on. Let's talk about 300, UFC 300. Look, we already know that 298's next. It's stacked. 299 follows. It's stacked. So February and March, we're legit, man. In April, we have UFC 300 coming up. It's in the works still, but we need a main event. And by the way, Dana White's been talking. It sounds like we might even need a co-main event, only because he's saying this thing's going to be astronomical, right? Don't get me wrong. I know there's two title fights. There's the BMF, and then there's Zhang Weili and Yan Zhonan. So I'm loving the way this thing's shaping up. But what do you think of what's already been announced for UFC 300? And what do you think it would take to finalize this monumental card? Mike in Toronto.
Yeah, it's just a big main event, right? Like, I think what they have on the card now, what they'll continue to add in terms of like a main card or a prelim fight, they'll be good. They'll get ranked fighters. I think there's already like 6 current or former UFC champions, maybe more on this card, probably more to come. So it's just about pinning down that main event, which I don't know what direction they're going to be. Are they going to pull, a Conor McGregor rabbit out of their hat? Are they going to try to turn Dricus around against Israel Adesanya, as we talked earlier, Khamzat Chimaev, whoever may be available? We'll get something on there. I think the only thing that would probably be like the biggest disappointment is if we do get Leon Edwards and Bilal Muhammad as the main event. I think a lot of people will be off put on that. Not saying it shouldn't be on the card, not saying it wouldn't be a worthy co-main event, but I think if you're putting that, just with the way many MMA fans feel about Bilal Muhammad, that one's going to be a little bit of a rough sell there. But I'm confident they'll figure something out. I think the one that right now, what we have on the lineup that's most exciting, that's been added since we last did the show, is Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway for the BMF title, which is an absolutely fantastic fight. One of the best that can be made in MMA. 24, I think, bonuses in the UFC between these two guys. So it's just some remarkable matchmaking. We'll get into, I guess, on this episode or in the future, bringing back the BMF title, what this does to the lightweight division in terms of stakes coming out of this fight, and Charles Oliveira versus Arman Sarukian on the same card. But man, I'm excited for Gaethje versus Holloway. This is the fight that I think will really test that record for Max Holloway of never being knocked down in 27 or so UFC fights, which is a record for him. So that one, I think, was kind of the big addition over this past week, and the one that I'm really excited for. But I'm curious to see how it shakes out in terms of adding like other title fights to this card. If we do get a Bilal Muhammad, Leon Edwards title fight, are you putting that after Gaethje versus Holloway? Because that sounds like a great way to get your crowd to start walking out during the main event, or have, a bit of a lackluster end. But if you also put that in the main event above Bilal Muhammad and Leon Edwards, it feels a little disrespectful to your real champions. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see the bout order given what we have now, but I do think we have a big main event still to come.
Matt, what are your thoughts on what not we, but the UFC has put together, and what do you think is left that would kind of appeal to what everyone's expecting?
Well, first off, like, if you look at the lineup that we have currently right now, I see at least 7 fights that would headline a normal UFC fight night, right? And if you just look at, last night's or Saturday's pay-per-view, how many fights could you say on that card would headline a fight night? Maybe 2, right? Mm-hmm. So I think this card, as it is right now, is way more stacked than what we're going to get than anything like in this current landscape of the UFC, when you have events every single weekend throughout the year. So I think they've done a fantastic job so far of stacking the deck for this event for UFC 299 and 300 even. But to your point, to the, I guess, the guys in the chat as well, there's got to be at least one more, you would think, right? If it is Edwards and Bilal Muhammad, that's a fantastic fight. I don't see why people would hate on that as the main event. It's a fantastic fight. Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway is a fantastic fight. Yeah, it's for the BMF title, and some people don't like the whole BMF title thing, but listen, if you want an all-action fight where people are just going to go out there and throw bombs at each other until someone falls or until the time runs out on 25 minutes, like, I can't think of a better fight to make. I do think that there is one trick up their sleeve, though. Whether it comes to fruition or not, I kind of think the UFC is kind of trying to play coy with Conor McGregor's return. And I kind of think that they're going to put Conor and Chandler on here at the last minute, kind of announce that as like a surprise. I don't know. To Mike's point, Mike made a fantastic point when he was talking, like, how do you actually organize the top of this card if you get one of these fights on there? Because is Conor going to return? Like, let's just say, for the sake of argument, Conor McGregor and Chandler gets added to this card. Where do you place that fight? Is that the main event? Is Conor the main event? You would think you would have to, right? And I think that Dana has kind of also hinted at in some of his interviews that this fight card is different than anything else, right? It's a milestone event. It's a big spectacle card, right? So I think you could have title fight, your BMF, Conor McGregor. And I think that would be fine for this particular card because it is that big show that they want to create, not necessarily stick to the mold of title fights go on last on every other pay-per-view.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder about with that, just real quick, is Conor McGregor going to be willing to share pay-per-view revenue with other champions on the card. That's historically
Yeah.
something that he's being opposed to. So that would be, I guess, something they'd have to figure out. And that's like my only doubt. But yeah, I think if they could get him there, that would be awesome.
Is that like a power play from him? I wasn't aware that he was totally against it. I think Tyron benefited a couple times from it, but I didn't know.
In the exception for the New York cards and things like that, maybe they're willing to do it here. But yeah, I don't know. Conor McGregor hasn't fought for a long time, so for him, maybe lessening his rate by sharing the pay-per-view pie with other people, maybe not be his ideal
I get
scenario.
it. If it comes out of his pocket, then I get his point. But yeah, hopefully the UFC just lines everyone's pockets. This is a milestone event. Goes, how about you, man? What's left? What would you add, I guess, if you were in that matchmaking room?
Man, Mike Bond blew my mind right now, and Matt Wells too, because they bring up excellent points. This card is like something that we don't see throughout the year. Throughout the year, we see stacked cards, right? That's normal. It'll happen from time to time here. But I think when you get to like UFC 300, 200, 100, you have to have a mixture of fights that mean something, right? They tell a story, a belt's on the line. And then you have to have your kind of fun fights, right? I think that's what separates these from the regular cards that we get. And, with Prochazka, with Rakic, that means something, right? Zhang Weili, Zhang Nonan, that means something. But with like Jim Miller, Bobby Green, that's a fun fight, right? Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway, that also to me is a fun fight. And I think if you are going to make that argument, this is the time where you could put that fight up at the top. And just, I think everybody would have to understand, like, this is just kind of a different beast. And this is what we want to end with. And I think it would be okay in that sense. But that's an excellent point that Mike brought up is, you do have the potential sometime with some of these title fights, depending on who's fighting. It just kind of takes the air out of the card a little bit, right? When it doesn't go the way we hope. And Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway, how does it not go down the way we all exactly think it will? So I'm with these two guys, man. Great points by both of them.
It's a milestone event. You come with your biggest guns. And if Jones is out because of the shoulder and Ngannou parted ways and Izzy's taking, a break, of course, we'd love to have Izzy back, right? And Poaton's going to be in Brazil a month later, a month after, then McGregor's ready to go. He qualifies. He entered the USADA pool at the time, like October 8th or 10th. Don't quote me, but I know it's within the 6 months of the April 13th date for UFC 300. I just think you got to go with him. Who knows? Maybe McGregor can win this fight fairly easy and still come back on International Fight Week. We'd love to get on that Forbes magazine by racking up 3 big paydays this year. And I'm not discounting Chandler one bit. I'm just saying from that position, I think if he's ready to go, he's ready to go. We're going to squeeze in one more here. We're going just a couple minutes of overtime. So, guys, tighten it up. But PFL, they did something pretty big. They released their card for the PFL versus Bellator Champions card that's taking place February 24th in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Here's a couple quick details. The stream will be on ESPN Plus pay-per-view. It'll be PFL versus Bellator no actual titles will be on the line. So neither the PFL champions, the ones that win the regular season and playoff, nor the Bellators, none will be on the line. All fights are 3 rounds. Elbows will be allowed. It's 4 bouts that will include champions versus champions. Guys, what are your thoughts on the card that was built? And should either of the promotions bring a broom? Matt?
No brooms. I like these matchups. These are fantastic. I think this is about as good as you can get with PFL versus Bellator, especially for the first event of the 2 promotions kind of dueling off. But these matchups are really intriguing, man. I think we could probably see it split down the middle if I had to give an early prediction between PFL and Bellator.
Mm-hmm. All right, next up goes your thoughts on the card and someone getting broomed.
No brooms, no mops. Like Matt said, I think actually when you look at it, it could go straight down the middle. What I like about it is, you have your champ fights and I respect those, but really outside of those, you have some matchups that kind of show the value in this acquisition and what could happen in the future. Like Pico Braga, that's a scrap. Collard McKee, that's going to be fun too. So I think there's going to be a lot of value going forward, and I'm going to be down watching this.
Mike, you pleased with the card, and does someone get broomed?
Yeah, I think it's a good card. All things considered, I would have really liked to see Chris Cyborg and Kayla Harrison on this. I wish they could have made that happen because to me, in my mind, that kind of defined this PFL versus Bellator kind of structure here. But other than that, Yoel Romero on there, Aaron Pico, there's some good fights on that undercard. So I think they did pretty much the best they could. And I guess a little teaser before we sign off. There is a bit of breaking news coming to MMA Junkie regarding this card from our colleague Nolan King. I won't spill the tea quite yet. People have to jump in. But one of these championship fights has been adjusted. One of the PFL champions is out. So keep it locked to MMA Junkie in the next few minutes here, and we'll have a story on the details of that.
All right. And real quick, I can't let you guys off the hook. If someone were to get broomed, who would it be?
Oh, can't wait to hear what Mike and Matt have to say on this. Go ahead.
No, you lead off now, Goes. So that red card for that 49ers comment, baby. We're going to the NFC Championship.
I think maybe PFL if it had to happen.
PFL gets roomed. Wow. Okay, Mike, what do you think? If you had to pick one,
yeah, I guess it would be PFL. And Nolan King did give me the thumbs up to share the news here. So Magomed Karamov is out of his fight with Jason Jackson and will be replaced by Ray Cooper III. So that is the new fight on there. Obviously, a little disappointing since Magomed Karamov has been tremendous in PFL.
He's exciting.
And they faced off in the cage and stuff. Ray Cooper, obviously great, but just not really already that champion versus champion format breaking down a little bit, even though I know Ray Cooper has won PFL seasons in the past.
How about you, Matt? You saw the lineup. If you had to pick one side that did get broomed, who do you think it would be?
Are we talking prelims included?
No, we're just talking about the four. Oh. Making the adjustment for Cooper, I guess.
In that case, I would say that PFL would get the broom if someone was going to get the broom.
All right, guys, excellent job on today's show, folks. We do this every Monday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Tell a friend, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. Lots of great stuff there. And of course, the website always putting out news throughout the day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So we got a fabulous app. It's free on all tablets and smartphones. The website's popping. Social media, we're on TikTok. I don't know if I told you guys, but we've been on that one for a while as well. I think we hit 1 million there for the likes or something like that. I got to get on TikTok, I guess. I've been holding back. But anyway, we really, really appreciate you guys tuning in. All the comments, you're more than welcome to always pop in and say what you got to say. We don't always have to agree, but debate with decency. We're out of here. Enjoy the rest of your day. Go out and be a champion.